Shedeur Sanders became a legend that day, not on the field, but in the booth, thanks to Nathan Zegura. With Sanders injured and inactive, Zegura transformed a standard football broadcast into an operatic celebration of Sanders' inevitable greatness. It wasn't commentary, it was canonization. The language was reverent, the tone divine, and the facts irrelevant. Zegura didn't just bend reality, he broke it, creating a mythic persona out of raw charisma and narrative desire. And fans, rather than correcting the record, leaned into the theater, reveling in the illusion. This moment lays bare how sports culture increasingly rewards myth over merit. The video unpacks how media figures shape perceptions by constructing larger-than-life identities, often divorced from actual performance. Zegura's praise wasn't just misguided, it was emblematic of a system where hype becomes currency. In this world, legends aren't born on the field, they're built in the booth. And the cost is a growing gap between what we watch and what we're told we're witnessing. It started like any other college football broadcast, until it didn't. The game was underway, and Shedeur Sanders was nowhere near the action. He wasn't under center. He wasn't warming up. He wasn't dressed out. He was sidelined with an injury. Absent from the field. Inactive. And yet, if you were watching the broadcast with the volume up, you'd have thought he was orchestrating the entire game with his mind. But because Nathan Zegura, a Cleveland Browns insider and longtime football commentator, was narrating Shedeur's presence like it was divine. He wasn't offering insight. He was delivering scripture. Zegura's praise of Sanders didn't stop at, "He's talented," or "He's got potential." That would have been expected. Or even, what happened instead was something else entirely, something that veered out of the realm of sports commentary and into full-blown theatrical monologue. Zegura called him, said he had destiny written all over him. Made sweeping statements that completely ignored the fact that Sanders wasn't playing. His delivery was intense, hyperbolic, emotional. It was less about the game and more about building a myth. And here's the most important part. This wasn't in reaction to a big play. There was no game-winning drive. No breakout performance. There wasn't even a snap from Shedeur that day. Zegura was pouring this kind of praise on a benched player. And not in passing.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
He made Sanders the centerpiece. That's not commentary. That's fiction. This moment, bizarre as it was, laid bare a growing trend in sports media. It's no longer about who's performing in the moment. It's about who feels like the main character. And for Zegura, Shedeur Sanders wasn't just the main character, he was the epic hero. The one the cameras couldn't stop showing. The guy whose injured status didn't matter, because in the eyes of some, he didn't need to play to prove anything. But here's where it gets concerning. When that kind of praise is applied to someone who isn't participating, it creates a warped sense of reality. It separates the narrative from the facts. It tells the viewer that what's happening on the field is secondary to the story off the field. And the story, according to Zegura, was that Shedeur Sanders is inevitable. This wasn't just over-the-top praise. This was media myth-making in real time. The kind of narrative inflation that turns promising players into untouchable symbols before they've had a chance to earn it through performance. Shedeur's career should be measured by what he does, not what others say he represents. But in this broadcast, Zegura skipped straight to canonizing him, bypassing the process, the production, and the proof. What made it even more surreal was how completely disconnected it was from the context of the game. Sanders wasn't playing. Yet the commentary was flowing like he'd just broken a record. And that's what made the internet explode. Clips of Zegura's words went viral, not out of admiration, but out of disbelief. People weren't quoting him because it was insightful. They were quoting him because it was absurd. The kind of absurd that makes you pause and ask, did he just say that? The memes came fast. The reactions were relentless. People were stunned not just by the words, but by the disconnect. This wasn't a case of enthusiastic bias. This was a broadcast where the myth was louder than the moment, and everyone watching could see it. Because if someone can receive this level of praise without stepping on the field, what happens when they do? The expectations become unmanageable. The standard becomes unfair. The narrative becomes a burden. And Shedeur? He didn't ask for that. He wasn't giving interviews or calling for attention. He was sidelined due to injury, already dealing with the frustration of being unable to contribute. But Zegura's performance layered something else on top of that, the weight of myth. That weight isn't easy to carry. When a player becomes a symbol, their actual performance starts to matter less than their image. And that's where the real damage happens. Because no matter how good Shedeur might be, and he is talented, he's now playing against a version of himself that only exists in the minds of overzealous commentators and viral clips. That kind of narrative can break a career before it begins. This moment also highlighted how sports media has shifted. It's not about covering the game anymore. It's about delivering moments. Quotes that trend. Segments that stick. And if that means inflating a story until it loses all grounding in reality, so be it. And while Zegura's delivery was memorable, no one's denying that it came at a cost. Because in celebrating a player who wasn't playing, he erased the ones who were. The athletes who were actively grinding on the field, making plays, carrying the team, none of them got a monologue. None of them got praised as him. It was Shedeur. And that sends a clear message. Performance is optional. Storyline is everything. That's a dangerous mindset. It undermines merit. It tells young athletes that playing well might not be enough if you don't have a name or narrative behind you. And it tells viewers that analysis isn't about what you see, it's about what sounds good on social media. Zegura may not have intended to create that kind of ripple effect. But that's what happened. And it's worth holding that up to the light, because moments like these don't just disappear. They build on each other. They shape how players are evaluated. They influence decisions, coaching, contracts, branding. All of it gets skewed when media figures start speaking in myths. And let's not forget how all of this fuels the larger-than-life fan culture. Once a player is turned into a symbol, the fan base follows suit. Every mention becomes polarized. You're either defending the myth or tearing it down. There's no in-between. That's not sustainable. Athletes deserve room to develop, make mistakes, improve. They deserve to be seen as players, not projections. And when a commentator like Zegura skips past that and jumps straight into destiny-driven storytelling, it takes that chance away. And it's not just about Shedeur. It's about the ecosystem. The same narrative that inflated Sanders can be replicated for the next player, and the next, and the next. Because the machinery doesn't stop. There's always another moment to overhype. Another name to mythologize. Another clip to go viral. So unless something changes, this will keep happening. And the fans? They're paying attention. They're not just accepting everything at face value anymore. They're calling it out. Holding media figures accountable. Demanding coverage that respects the actual game. So if you watched that moment and felt like the broadcast was more fiction than football, you weren't alone. If you've ever rolled your eyes at a commentator who turned basic stats into poetry, hit that like button. If you think sports media needs to remember that potential isn't the same as performance, drop a comment. And if you're here for more breakdowns of the wildest, most unhinged moments in sports media, subscribe. Because this industry is full of stories that blur the line between coverage and spectacle. And someone's got to sort through the noise. This moment with Nathan Zegura and Shedeur Sanders wasn't just a one-off, a weird blip in an otherwise routine football broadcast. It was the kind of moment that pulls back the curtain on a deeper dysfunction. One that's been building for years in the way sports are discussed, sold, and ultimately distorted. Because when a commentator starts treating a benched player like a generational icon in the middle of the game, it's not just dramatic, it's revealing. It shows you exactly how far the media is willing to stretch a narrative if it fits the right mold. And Shedeur Sanders fits that mold perfectly. He's a big name, the son of an even bigger one. He's already got brand deals. He's already trending. He's already followed like a celebrity, not just an athlete. And because of that, he doesn't even need to perform to become the story. He just needs to show up. Sit on the sideline. Exist. The media will do the rest. And Zegura did. He didn't hesitate. He went all in. Not based on performance, but on persona. And it wasn't subtle either. He wasn't sneaking in a compliment or making a small projection. He went full epic mode. He's him. Destiny. Greatness. It was mythic language. Glorification so inflated it collapsed under its own weight. And to be clear, no one's arguing that Shedeur isn't talented, or that he won't go on to have an incredible career. This isn't about tearing him down. It's about questioning how and why the media builds these icons in the first place, especially when the facts don't line up. Because when you start elevating players based on narrative instead of what's actually happening on the field, you distort the game itself. You shift attention away from effort, away from impact, and toward aura. And once that shift takes hold, everything changes. Suddenly, it's not about what a player did, it's about what people believe they can do. And that's where analysis starts becoming entertainment. Commentary starts becoming performance. What Nathan Zegura delivered that day wasn't analysis. It was spectacle. It was the kind of moment designed not to inform, but to impress. Something crafted more for clips and retweets than for clarity. And it worked. The clip went viral. People couldn't stop watching it. Not because it was insightful, but because it was too much. It was a sports soliloquy. Shakespeare in cleats. And it exposed how easily media figures can shape athlete legacies based not on results, but on emotion. That's a huge problem. Because it doesn't just impact one player. It sets a precedent. It teaches future athletes that performance is secondary to persona. It tells them, be seen, be charismatic, be symbolic, and the praise will follow. Even if your cleats never touch the field that day. That's the part no one wants to say out loud. This kind of media behavior trains audiences to expect storylines over substance. It encourages fans to obsess over image instead of the mechanics of the game. And it sets up players, especially young ones, for failure. Because no one can live up to a myth. And when you build someone into a myth before they've had the chance to build a consistent resume, the fall is inevitable. And brutal. The expectations don't rise gradually, they skyrocket. And if there's even a hint of underperformance, it's not seen as a learning curve, it's seen as betrayal. That's the danger of mythologizing athletes before they've had a full season, a playoff run, a setback to grow from. It traps them inside a story that they never got to write. And Shedeur, like many before him, now has to live with that. Every snap, every pass, every game he does play from here on out will be compared to the version of him that Nathan Zegura narrated into existence. A version where he was a living legend before he even took the field. That's not fair. To Shedeur. To the team. To the sport. Because sports are supposed to be earned. Not written into prophecy by a sideline mic. And yes, it's easy to laugh. It's easy to meme the clip and poke fun at how over the top it was. But the impact is real. The culture of excessive hype doesn't just create viral moments. It warps how we value athletes. It changes who gets attention. It shapes fan expectations. And once the media starts operating like a hype machine, spinning stories on a loop, we lose something real. We lose the game itself. Because the focus stops being on execution, skill, or improvement, and starts being on drama. On image. On who looks like a star. That's what Zegura was reacting to. Not Shedeur Sanders the athlete. Shedeur Sanders the idea. He wasn't watching the game. He was watching the brand. And that brand, by design, is built for exaggeration. Built for media moments like this. But where does it end? If a player can be called him from the bench, what do we say when they actually dominate? What words are left when the bar's already been set so astronomically high from a non-performance? That's the issue. When you start at the peak of praise, everything else becomes a letdown. There's no space left to rise. No space left to surprise. And it's not just about commentary either. It affects how players are coached, how their careers are managed, how their peers interact with them. It distorts every layer of the sport. Because when narrative outweighs numbers, nobody wins. Not the fans who want honest coverage. Not the athletes grinding for recognition. Not the sport trying to preserve its integrity. So yeah, Zegura's monologue was entertaining. But it was also a warning. A perfect snapshot of what happens when the spectacle of sports overtakes the sport itself. And if broadcasters like him don't learn to recalibrate, if they don't start grounding their praise in performance again, this cycle will keep repeating. More overhyped players. More viral clips. More pressure. More burnout. The myth gets bigger. The truth gets quieter. And in the end, the only thing left is disappointment, when the real person inevitably can't match the legend built in their name. Here's the part no one in the industry wants to admit. The myth is easier to sell than the truth. The truth is slow. It requires watching every snap, every play, every moment that isn't viral. It means admitting that even talented players have off days. That greatness is forged in grind, not granted by birthright. That development is messy and real and full of uncomfortable in-between moments. But the myth? The myth is clean. The myth is clickable. The myth gives you someone to believe in now before the results come in. The myth is a shortcut. And that's exactly what Nathan Zegura took with Shedeur Sanders. He skipped the process. He didn't wait to see how Shedeur would bounce back from injury. He didn't contextualize the moment. He didn't talk about what the team was doing in that game. Instead, he grabbed the mic and performed a monologue, a eulogy for humility, a victory speech for potential. And by doing so, he played into the exact kind of media narrative that creates unsustainable pressure on athletes. Because once you tell the world that someone is already greatness incarnate, anything less than perfection becomes failure. You strip away their room to grow, to stumble, to adjust. What Zegura gave us wasn't just excessive. It was harmful. It didn't reflect Shedeur's performance. It didn't reflect the game. It didn't even reflect reality. It reflected what sports commentary has become, theater. And in this case, a one-man stage play where the script had nothing to do with the game unfolding on the field. The players actually playing? Who were sweating it out, putting their bodies on the line, contributing to the outcome. They got buried under Zegura's booming voice, praising a player who wasn't even in uniform. That's the core problem. When media mythologizes one person to that extent, it flattens everyone else. The broadcast didn't celebrate a team. It didn't analyze strategies or matchups. It revolved around one guy. Not for what he was doing, but for who he symbolized. And in doing so, it made the game about story, not sport. And what's more frustrating is that Zegura knows better. He's not some rookie broadcaster who got caught up in the moment. He's been around football long enough to know how narratives work, to know the power of language, to understand that what you say about an athlete, especially on a live broadcast, matters. And he still did it anyway. Because in today's media landscape, the incentive isn't accuracy. It's impact. How fast can a quote spread? How fast can it become a meme? How fast can it live on in TikToks and reaction videos and YouTube shorts? And the best part? The subject doesn't even have to do anything. They just have to exist. That's where we are now. The standard isn't excellence. It's visibility. And Zegura's commentary was a perfect case study in that shift. A benched player became the centerpiece of a broadcast. Not because of a comeback. Not because of an on-field legacy. But because a commentator decided the story was more important than the stats. And we need to talk about what that does to the athlete. Because when you inflate someone to the point of deification, you're not helping them, you're setting them up. Setting them up to be resented when they don't live up to it. Setting them up to be blamed for hype they didn't ask for. Setting them up to be compared not to their peers, but to the myth created in their name. Shedeur Sanders didn't ask for this narrative. He didn't write the script. He didn't jump into the broadcast booth and demand reverence. But now, he's the one who has to carry it. Every time he steps on the field, he's playing not just against the defense, but against the version of himself that Nathan Zegura created in front of a national audience. And it's not just unfair, it's exhausting. Because the pedestal is now part of the job. And the pedestal wasn't earned through touchdowns or film study or leadership. It was handed out because he looked the part. Because he had the energy. Because he had the story. This kind of thing happens when media stops being a mirror and starts being a stage. And we can't pretend this was just one guy going a little too far. The clip went viral not because it was unique, but because it was familiar. It felt like the natural conclusion of years of exaggerated storytelling, hot takes, and fantasy-driven sports commentary. It was louder, sure, but it wasn't new. We've seen this pattern before. A young player gets hyped beyond reason. Every game is scrutinized like it's a legacy-defining moment. Every mistake is blown out of proportion. And then, when they inevitably stumble, the same voices that praised them go quiet. Or worse, that's the full cycle of media myth-making. Hype, performance, pressure, backlash. And all of it started here, with a few seconds of exaggerated commentary in a game that Shedeur Sanders didn't even play in. This is where fans have to start questioning the product they're being fed. Is this sports commentary? Or is it scripted theater? Are we watching analysis? Or are we being pitched a character arc? Because if this is what sports media has become, if players are being branded as legends before they even step on the field, then what's the point of the game? The myth isn't just overwhelming. It's unnecessary. Let Shedeur Sanders write his own story. Through play. Through effort. Through real football moments that matter. He's earned the spotlight through talent, not just name recognition. So let's see him work. Let him prove it. Let him build it. That's what greatness actually is, not being told you're great, but showing it day by day. And for Nathan Zegura, maybe this moment is a wake-up call. Not to be less enthusiastic, but to be more responsible. Because what you say on the mic matters, especially when it turns into the headline, the meme, the viral moment. And when you speak like the story's already over, you rob athletes of the chance to tell it for themselves. If you watched that moment and felt like something was off, you weren't wrong. If you heard that praise and wondered what game was being watched, you weren't the only one. If you're tired of the spectacle overshadowing the sport, this is your moment too. Hit the like button if you believe performance should speak louder than potential. Drop a comment if you think sports commentary needs to get back to basics. And subscribe if you're here for the raw breakdowns. No fluff, no fantasy, just reality. Because as long as they keep building myths out of moments that didn't happen, someone has to keep the receipts.